Hey, it's Steve Gallia from Algonquin Fly Tying Supply. Today we're going to do a video for beginners, and we're going to talk about one of the most basic skills you need to tie flies, and that is laying on a thread base. Thread base serves two purposes. The first is to attach the thread and the bobbin to the hook so you can secure other materials onto the hook. The second is to create a non-slip base along the shank of the hook, along the tying surface, so that when you do tie on materials, they don't shift or slip. If you're doing that, on this bare metal, that would be what would happen. But if you have a good thread base, that's not going to be an issue at all. A couple of things you want to do before you tie on a thread base is you want to have a look at the pattern you're dealing with and make sure that you cover what's required in tie-in points for the pattern. Generally, it's about an eye width back from the eye of the hook to somewhere around the barb for most patterns. Some patterns will take it further than the barb, some will go shorter. But if you look at your pattern, you'll have a good idea of where you need to tie and what you need to cover off. Tying the thread base is actually not a big deal. You just need to get the thread you're going to use and you put it on your bobbin. You're going to make sure your hook is secured very well, because the worst thing you can do is apply pressure on a hook with thread and find that it's slipping with you. That just gets very frustrating, so you want to avoid that. So make sure your hook's secured very well right off the bat. Then you get your thread and you lay it diagonally across the hook, roughly around where you want to tie in to begin with. And you bring that end over. Sometimes it'll slip like that. Bring it back to where you want to tie in. Two or three or four turns, 2 or 3 for that matter. You can leave it. You're now actually attached very nicely to the hook. So you take this, which is what we call a tag end, and you tie along the tag end. It's sort of at a 45-degree angle. And when you do that, the thread slips down to the last turn, so you have consecutive touching turns, which is important because that means you're going to have a nice smooth body. So there I have it. I'm down to the barb of the hook, which is where I want to be. This tag end has served its purpose, so I will remove it. And then if you were to tie on things like tails or tags onto this fly, depending on the pattern you're working at, you would start by leaving your thread here and tying them on and wrapping forward. If you're going to start at the front, for instance, putting on a pair of wings before you do anything else, you would wrap forward again. You try to do it in consecutive touching turns. You'll notice how I'm angling away from the barb of the hook. That's to avoid it. The other thing you can try to do is keep your turns fairly tight. A lot of beginners will use that much material and swing, and it just it doesn't really affect anything, but it does sort of waste your time. But if you keep your turns fairly tight, working with a fairly short thread, it's not a big deal. Now let's get back to the eye of the hook here. I'll explain that a little bit better. Here's the eye of the hook. There's a width there from the front to the back. That's called an eye width. What we try to do is leave an eye width, at least one eye width, sometimes an eye width and a half, depending on the pattern, bare when you tie on that base. And the reason you're going to leave it bare is because you're going to not want to bring material much more forward than that. You'll make that the head of the fly, but try to keep materials away from it, because oftentimes when you bring materials forward, they will obstruct the eye of the hook, and that can be a real problem when you're trying to clip it out. The best way to deal with it is to keep materials away from it in the first place. So that's what we call when we bring thread and material closer than that, we call it crowding the eye. You don't want to crowd the eye. The sign of a bad fly, a fly that's been poorly done, is an eye that's been crowded. So you want to try to avoid that. And you can avoid that by keeping the thread back. That's really all there is to it, laying on a base. But it's a very simple technique, but it's a very important one, because you're going to be doing it on almost all the flies you tie. If you're new at this, what I would advise you to do is practice a whole lot before you tie your first fly, because it'll allow you to get the feel of the thread you're dealing with. And then, you know, by the time you're tying your first fly, you'll have an idea of how that works. You'll also, you know, not break threads while you've got materials on, because there's nothing more frustrating than that. A little bit of practice goes a long way. You're going to be doing it on every fly. You'll get better at it as you go. But before you tie your first one, you know, spend a half an hour doing this and practicing with it so you get a really good feel for how it works. That's basically it. I hope you enjoy this video, and I hope it's helpful to you. Please visit Algonquin Fly Tying Supply at algonquinflytying.com.